My world came crashing down the day my own son accused me of destroying his children's lives. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. No one else seemed to see that the deep purple bruise on his arm was telling an entirely different story. The deafening silence that had plagued our family for years finally shattered when I revealed the photographs he had kept hidden away, a secret testament to his suffering. It all started on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of family lunch I'd come to cherish all week. At 69, these moments were my anchor, especially after my wife Martha passed away 5 years ago. Our house in the suburbs of Cleveland had always been the family hub, spacious, warm, and filled with the comforting aroma of my slow-cooked pot roast. Vincent, my 45-year-old son, showed up late that day, which was nothing new. He entered with his teenage children and his wife, Roberta. There was a hesitancy in his movements, a careful, almost pained restraint that I knew all too well. 25 years of marriage to Roberta had altered my son in so many ways that I sometimes struggled to see the vibrant young man I had raised. "Dad, you shouldn't have gone to all this trouble," he said, gesturing to the carefully set dining table. It was his standard line, a way of minimizing my effort that always made him seem uncomfortable with any act of kindness I offered. "It's my pleasure," I replied, turning to hug my grandchildren, Emily and Tyler. They barely reciprocated the embrace. Over the past year, they had become increasingly distant and withdrawn. Emily, who used to chatter endlessly about school and friends, now rarely lifted her eyes from the floor. Roberta made her entrance last, her presence instantly dominating the room. She was a tall, imposing woman with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Arthur," she said, greeting me with a curt nod. Never Dad, always Arthur. A subtle but constant reminder that she considered me an outsider in the family she controlled. The lunch moved along with its usual strained rhythm, superficial chatter, tense smiles, and the nagging feeling that we were all actors in a poorly rehearsed play. The breaking point arrived with dessert. "Emily, sweetie, you've hardly touched your dinner," I remarked gently, placing a slice of apple pie in front of my granddaughter. "Is everything okay?" Before Emily could form a response, Roberta cut in. "She's fine, she's just not a fan of your cooking." The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I saw Vincent flinch, his hand unconsciously tugging down the long sleeve of his shirt. "I was just asking," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "You're always just asking, aren't you, Arthur?" Roberta shot back, dropping her fork onto her plate with a clatter. "Always prying, always thinking you know what's best for our children." "Roberta, please," Vincent murmured, his eyes fixed on his plate. It was Emily who spoke next, her voice a fragile whisper. "Grandpa gave me a book about families and how they should treat each other." My heart began to pound. A few weeks prior, I had given Emily a simple book about healthy family dynamics. It was a gentle book, something that shouldn't have been controversial. But judging by the venomous look Roberta shot her daughter, I knew I had made a grave error. "So that's it," Roberta said, her voice dangerously low. "You're poisoning her mind, trying to convince her that there's something wrong with our family." "That's not what," I started, but she cut me off. "You've always done this, always looking down on us, implying we're not good enough." She turned her glare on the children. "Get in the car now." The children rose from their chairs like little automatons, their movements betraying a long-practiced obedience. Tyler avoided my gaze entirely, but Emily's eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, a silent, desperate plea that I couldn't understand. When they were gone, Roberta stood as well. "Come on, Vincent." That's when I saw it. As Vincent pushed his chair back and stood up, his sleeve rode up just an inch, revealing a sickening, mottled bruise, deep purple and tinged with yellow, blotching his forearm. Our eyes met, and in his, I saw a terrible mix of shame and desperation. "Vincent," I said, my voice shaking, "what happened to your arm?" He yanked his sleeve down instantly, but the image was burned into my mind. "It's nothing. I bumped it on the filing cabinet at work." Roberta let out a short, cruel laugh. "Always so clumsy, my Vincent." Something inside me snapped. All the little oddities, the canceled plans, the nervous glances I had dismissed or rationalized over the years, they all clicked into place, forming a hideous, undeniable puzzle. "That doesn't look like an accident." I insisted, taking a step toward him. That's when Vincent turned on me, his words lashing out like a whip. "Stop it, Dad! Just stop interfering in my life! You're ruining my children's childhood with your constant meddling. Why can't you just leave us alone?" I was frozen, the words hitting me with the force of physical blows. But it wasn't just his anger. It was the raw terror in his eyes as he spoke, the way his gaze darted toward Roberta after each word, as if checking for her approval. Roberta smirked, her cold eyes glinting with triumph. "You see? Not even your own son wants you around. Maybe it's time you accepted that you're no longer needed in this family, Arthur." They left me standing alone in the deafening silence of my dining room, surrounded by half-eaten plates of food. But something fundamental had shifted within me. The old fear, the fear of causing a scene, of losing contact with my grandchildren, was replaced by a new, much more urgent terror. I went upstairs to my bedroom and opened the old cedar chest where I kept the family photo albums. Tucked at the very bottom was something I'd found weeks ago but hadn't had the nerve to inspect. A simple manila folder Vincent had left behind when he'd helped me organize some of Martha's old things. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were dozens of photos. They were pictures Vincent had taken of himself over the years, secretly documenting bruises, cuts, and once, even a plaster cast on his wrist. Each photo was meticulously dated, like evidence being compiled for a trial, a silent scream for help he had never found the courage to utter. I collapsed onto the edge of my bed as my world dissolved around me. How long had this been happening? How had I been so blind? Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. "Grandpa, please help me. It's not just Dad." The full, horrifying truth hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just Vincent. The children were in danger too. As tears streamed down my face, I made a vow. The silence was over. No matter the cost, no matter who I had to confront, I would not stay quiet any longer. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is to refuse to look away, even when the truth threatens to shatter your heart. I barely slept a wink that night. Emily's desperate plea echoed in my mind as I stared at the ceiling. The photos from Vincent's hidden folders spread across my bed, a gallery of suffering I had failed to see. As dawn broke, I forced myself to make a pot of coffee and think. I had to be strategic. One wrong move could push Vincent and the children further into Roberta's grasp or put them in even greater danger. Looking back, the signs had been flashing for years. Vincent canceling visits at the last second with flimsy excuses, the children's personalities dimming over time, the way Roberta always spoke for them, as if they were her possessions rather than her family. I picked up a photo dated 2012. Vincent had a black eye, poorly hidden with concealer. The date corresponded with a Christmas visit they'd abruptly canceled, claiming Vincent had a bad case of the flu. I remembered calling to check on him, and Roberta had answered, her tone clipped and final, saying he was asleep and couldn't be disturbed. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Vincent's name flashed on the screen. "Dad?" he said, his voice strained and unnaturally cheerful. "About yesterday. I'm sorry we left like that." "Vincent," I said, choosing my words with care. We need to talk about what I saw. A long, heavy pause. I told you, I bumped into a cabinet. And the photos, son? The ones I found in your folder. The ones you've been taking for years. His sharp intake of breath was the only sound for several seconds. You went through my things? He whispered. You left them here, Vincent? I think a part of you wanted me to find them. You don't understand, his voice cracked. You have to forget what you saw. Please. Emily texted me, Vincent. She's asking for help. Another silence. This one, thick with fear. Roberta checks her phone, he finally managed to say, his voice trembling. If she saw that, then let me help you. All of you. You can't, he said, the defeat in his voice breaking my heart. Nobody can. The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. Then, with a newfound resolve, I grabbed my address book. Leo Harrison had been my best friend for 40 years and had spent his entire career in social services before retiring. If anyone knew what to do, it was Leo. 2 hours later, Leo sat at my kitchen table, his expression grim as he sorted through the photographs. This is bad, Arthur, he said. Years of documented abuse, but you're going to need more than this if you want to get them out. More? What more could I possibly need? Leo reached across the table and put a hand on my arm. The system is a maze. If Vincent denies it, and he probably will, out of terror these photos might not be enough on their own. So what do I do? Wait for something worse to happen? No, Leo said, his voice firm. You document everything. Every phone call, every canceled visit, every odd comment from the kids. And you keep building that line of trust with Emily. She reached out to you. That's your way in. For the next week, that's exactly what I did. I filled a notebook with every memory I could dredge up, every incident I had previously rationalized. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Roberta had systematically isolated Vincent, controlled their finances, and ruled their home through fear. I tried calling Vincent every day, but he either wouldn't answer or his conversations were brief and stilted, as if Roberta were standing right next to him, which I suspected she often was. Then, on Thursday evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Emily standing on my porch, clutching her backpack to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. "Grandpa," she said, her voice trembling, "can I stay here tonight?" I pulled her inside immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Of course, sweetie. Does your mother know you're here?" She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I was supposed to be at a friend's house for a study group, but I couldn't go back home." "What happened?" I asked, leading her to the sofa. With shaking hands, she pulled her phone from her backpack and played a video. I watched in horror as Roberta screamed at Vincent, her face twisted in rage, while Tyler cowered in a corner. "She found out Dad was talking to you," Emily whispered. "She took his phone and smashed it. She said no one was going to break up her family." As I held my trembling granddaughter, I knew the time for careful planning was over. The wall of silence had protected Roberta for far too long. It was time to bring it down. "She's going to come looking for me," Emily whispered, casting a nervous glance toward the windows. "When she realizes I'm not at Kayla's house." I drew the living room curtain shut and sat beside her. "You're safe here, Emily." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was a fragile promise. People like Roberta didn't just let go of their control. "We need to call the police," I said gently. Emily's eyes widened in panic. "No," she said, "if we ever called the police, she'd—" Her voice trailed off, unable to complete the threat. "What about your dad and Tyler?" "Dad sent me here," Emily confessed, her voice breaking. After Mom smashed his phone, she went to the garage to get a drink. He told me to run, to come to you and bring this. She held up the phone with the video. He said you'd know what to do. My heart ached with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Even in that hell, Vincent had found the strength to protect his daughter. Your father was right to send you here, I said, squeezing her hand. And now we have to help him and Tyler. I called Leo again, my voice tight with urgency. He arrived 20 minutes later with a woman named Samantha, a social worker who specialized in domestic violence cases. While I made hot chocolate in the kitchen, Samantha spoke to Emily, her voice calm and reassuring. I could see my granddaughter's tense shoulders begin to relax as she talked. The video is powerful, Leo told me quietly, but Emily's testimony is crucial. We have to get Vincent and Tyler out of that house tonight. Roberta will never let them go, I said. No, she won't, Leo agreed. That's why we have to be smart. Samantha joined us in the kitchen. We're filing for an emergency protective order right now, she explained. The video, combined with Emily's statement and your historical evidence, should be enough to get it granted immediately. And Vincent and Tyler? I asked. Once the order is in place, police officers will escort us to the house to ensure their safe removal, she said. But we have to move fast. As if on cue, my phone rang. An unknown number. Dad? It was Vincent's voice, barely a whisper. I'm using a neighbor's phone. Is Emily with you? Yes, she's safe, I assured him. Vincent, listen. We're getting help. She knows, he whispered frantically. She's been drinking. She's looking for her car keys. My blood ran cold. Is Tyler with you? Yes. We're locked in the bathroom. His voice broke. Dad, I'm so scared. Give me the address, Samantha said, already dialing on her own phone. We'll call for an immediate dispatch. The next hour was a blur of phone calls and anxious waiting. Emily stayed curled up on the sofa, her eyes glued to the front door. Finally, Samantha's phone rang. She listened intently, her expression serious. When she hung up, the relief on her face was palpable. The police have Roberta in custody, she announced. Vincent and Tyler are safe. They're on their way here. Emily dissolved into tears, the accumulated stress of years finally pouring out. I held her close, my own tears flowing freely. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Vincent standing there, with Tyler clinging to his leg. His face was pale and his eyes were red-rimmed, but underneath the exhaustion, I saw a tiny, fragile spark of hope. Dad, he whispered, and collapsed into my arms. We gathered in the living room, a broken family, taking its first tentative steps toward healing. Samantha explained the next steps, the protective order, the legal proceedings, the support services available. You can all stay here, I said firmly, for as long as you need. Vincent looked at me, years of shame in his eyes. I should have told you sooner. I was just so afraid. I should have seen it sooner, I countered, taking his hand. The signs were all there. I just didn't want to believe them. Later that night, long after the children were asleep, Vincent and I sat at the kitchen table. When did it start? I asked softly. Little things, he said, staring into his cold cup of tea. Controlling what I wore, criticizing my friends. Then, one night, he pushed me during an argument. He was so sorry afterward. He gave a bitter laugh. They're always sorry, aren't they? Until the next time. Why didn't you leave? She threatened to take the kids, he said, his eyes haunted. She said no judge would ever give custody to an unfit father, and she would spend every penny she had to make sure I looked unfit, and a part of me believed her. I reached across the table and took his hand. No one deserves that, Vincent. No one. "I know that now," he whispered. But it took Emily's courage to make me see it. She refused to let the fear win. Outside, the first faint light of dawn was streaking across the sky. A new day. The road ahead would be long and filled with scars, both visible and invisible. But as I looked at my son, I saw something I hadn't seen in decades: determination. The silence had finally been broken. And in its place, a family had a chance to find its way back to itself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. My quiet, empty house transformed into a sanctuary for 3 wounded people. But even with Roberta gone, her shadow loomed large. The emergency protective order was extended, but legal documents couldn't shield us from the social fallout. The first attack came from my younger son, Jason. He called one afternoon, his voice sharp with accusation. "What have you done, Dad?" he demanded. "Roberta called Diana last night, completely falling apart. Diana was Jason's wife, and she'd always been charmed by Roberta's polished exterior. I've done what had to be done, Jason," I said calmly. "There are things about Roberta you don't know." "She told us everything," he shot back. "How you've been trying to drive a wedge between them for years. How you coached Emily to make up these stories." My hand tightened on the receiver. "That's a lie." "Is it? Because it looks to me like you couldn't stand not being the center of the family anymore, so you decided to destroy it." The injustice of it was like a slap in the face. "Jason, Roberta has been hurting Vincent and those kids for years. We have proof." "Proof you probably manufactured. God, Dad, I know you've been lonely since Mom died, but this is insane. Come over here and see for yourself," I pleaded, my patience gone. "Talk to Vincent. Look at the evidence." "I don't need to. Roberta's been part of this family for 25 years. We know her." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "I'm not getting involved in your little drama," Jason said coldly. "But don't expect us for Thanksgiving if you keep this up." He hung up. When I told Vincent, he just nodded, a weary resignation on his face. "Roberta is a master of public relations," he said. "She's charming to everyone outside the home. She's probably been planting these seeds with Jason and Diana for years, just in case I ever got the courage to leave." The isolation intensified. Old friends started avoiding me at the grocery store. Neighbors who used to wave now looked straight through me. Someone left a note in my mailbox. "False accusations ruin lives. Shame on you." Even my church, my spiritual home for over 30 years, became a hostile environment. Roberta, who had rarely ever attended, suddenly became a fixture in the front pew, the very picture of a heartbroken mother, tearfully telling anyone who would listen how her cruel father-in-law had stolen her family. People I'd known for decades started whispering behind my back. One Sunday, an old friend, Henry Porter, cornered me after the service. "You don't understand the damage you're doing, Arthur," he said, his voice laced with pity. "Breaking up a family over what could be a simple misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding, Henry." "Well, Roberta seems genuinely devastated," he countered. "And frankly, Arthur, you've been different since Martha died. More interfering. Is it possible you're just lonely and seeing problems that aren't there?" I pulled my arm from his condescending grasp. "Is it possible you're ignoring abuse because it makes you uncomfortable to admit that someone you know is capable of such cruelty?" After that, we stopped going to church. The children felt the chill too. When school started, rumors were already swirling. Tyler retreated even further into his shell, while Emily faced it head-on. "A girl at school asked me why I was lying about my mom," she told me one afternoon, her eyes wet with tears. "She said her parents told her I was just doing it for attention. Even my own sister, Eleanor, called to suggest I was overreacting. There are 2 sides to every story, Arthur. Not when it comes to abuse." I said firmly. There's no justification for that. By October, our world had shrunk to a tiny island. Just me, Vincent, the kids, and my loyal friend Leo. But within our small sanctuary, something amazing was happening. Without Roberta's oppressive presence, the kids began to heal. Tyler started talking at dinner. Emily's nightmares faded. And Vincent, my son, stood a little taller each day. One evening, as we did dishes, Vincent looked at me. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," he said quietly. "All this judgment." He was silent for a moment, then nodded. "It is. For the first time in decades, I'm not afraid in my own home." He glanced toward the living room, where the sound of the kids laughing over a board game drifted in, and I get to hear that sound again. I'd forgotten what it was like. The isolation was painful, but in that moment, I knew we had made the right choice. Being alone with the truth was infinitely better than being surrounded by comfortable lies. The court date for the permanent restraining order was on a cold November morning. The anxiety in the car was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Our social worker, Samantha, met us at the courthouse steps. "Stick to the facts," she advised. "Don't let her get to you." Inside, Roberta sat at a table with her lawyer, looking composed and elegant. We sat at the opposite table with our attorney, Mr. Rivera, a sharp man I'd hired, using a good portion of my retirement savings. Roberta's attorney went first, painting a picture of a devoted mother and community pillar whose life had been ruined by a meddling father-in-law. When it was our turn, Mr. Rivera systematically laid out our case. The decades of abuse, the photos, the medical records, and finally, the video. As the footage played on a large screen, Roberta's face contorted in rage. Her voice screaming at Vincent, the courtroom fell silent. I glanced at the judge, a stern-faced woman whose expression had hardened into granite. Then I saw movement in the gallery. It was Jason, my younger son. He had come after all, and his face was ashen with shock. When the video ended, Roberta's lawyer tried to dismiss it as a heated moment, but the judge cut him off. There is no context in which that behavior is acceptable. Vincent testified next, his voice shaking at first, then growing stronger as he recounted the years of fear. When it was Roberta's turn, she was a convincing actress, expressing regret for losing her temper, but insisting it was an isolated incident caused by my interference. "I just want my family back," she said, her voice catching with calculated emotion. The judge looked at her, unimpressed. "Miss Caldwell, do you deny the injuries documented in these photographs?" For the first time, Roberta faltered. "Vincent has always been clumsy." "For 25 years?" the judge asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the gallery. "That's not true." All heads turned. Jason was on his feet. "Your Honor," he said, his hands trembling, "I have something to add." The judge nodded. "Approach the bench." Jason walked forward, giving me a quick apologetic look. "My name is Jason Miller," he said to the court. "I'm Vincent's brother. Last Christmas, I walked in on Roberta grabbing my brother's arm so hard it left marks. When I confronted her, she threatened me. She said if I ever told anyone, she'd make sure I never saw my niece and nephew again." He pulled out his phone. I took a picture of his arm that day. I was too scared to do anything then, but I can't stay silent anymore. Roberta's mask of composure finally shattered. "You're lying," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "This is a conspiracy." "Control yourself, Ms. Caldwell," the judge warned. But it was too late. The rage we'd seen in the video erupted in the courtroom. 25 years I've put up with this family," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Vincent. "You think you can leave me? You're nothing without me? Nothing." Security officers moved in to restrain her, as she continued to shout threats. An hour later, we stood on the courthouse steps, the permanent restraining order in our hands. The weight of decades had finally lifted. Jason approached us cautiously. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to Vincent, his eyes filled with tears. "I should have believed you." Vincent hesitated for only a second before pulling his brother into a hug. As I watched them, I felt a deep fracture in our family begin to mend. The wall of silence hadn't just been broken, it had been utterly demolished. And in its place, the truth had emerged, painful, yes, but as clean and hopeful as the first light of dawn. Spring arrived, and with it, a sense of renewal. 6 months had passed since that day in court. Vincent was kneeling in my garden, his hands buried in the rich soil of a flower bed we'd built together. He looked up and gave me a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes, a sight so rare it still caught me off guard. "These tulips are going to be beautiful," he said. "Just like their gardener," I replied, kneeling beside him. So much had changed. The divorce was nearly final. Roberta had violated the restraining order twice, each time strengthening Vincent's legal position and further exposing her instability. The house they had once shared was sold, with Vincent's half put into a trust for the children's education. Healing was a slow, uneven process. There were still nightmares and quiet days. Emily still flinched at loud noises, but the forward steps outnumbered the backward ones. Tyler was thriving in his school's science club. Emily was in therapy and making new friends. And Vincent, my brave son, had enrolled in community college classes, finally pursuing the graphic design degree Roberta had convinced him to abandon all those years ago. He'd also started a local support group, using his own experience to help other men and women break their own cycles of silence. The doorbell rang. It was Jason holding a casserole dish. "Brought lasagna," he said. "The good kind with extra cheese, like Mom used to make." Our relationship was still tentative, but he was trying, showing up week after week, proving his remorse with actions, not just words. That night, as I looked around the dinner table at my family, damaged but mending, fractured but healing, I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. We had survived. Later, after Jason had left and the kids were in bed, Vincent and I sat on the porch swing watching fireflies flicker in the twilight. "I got a job offer," he said quietly, "at the community center, part-time, working with their domestic violence outreach program." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's wonderful, son." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "I used to think my life was over," he said, "that I'd never be anything more than her victim. I thought the best I could hope for was just to get through each day." He turned to me, his gaze clear and steady. "I was wrong. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment, my son free, my grandchildren smiling, our family slowly, carefully knitting itself back together. The journey had been harder than anything I'd ever endured, filled with loneliness, judgment, and painful truths. But sitting there in the warm spring air, seeing my son whole again, I knew without a single doubt that it had all been worth it. Because sometimes, breaking the silence is the only way to truly find your voice again. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.